Looking back after 20 years, I sometimes wonder if the events of that summer didn't happen in some other dimension. A place where your life exists before you've lived it, and where it goes afterward. None of it ever seemed real. During my time at the Tip Top Lodge, I had the feeling that I'd slip out of my own skin, hovering a few feet away while some poor yo-yo with my name and face tried to make his way toward a future he didn't understand and didn't want. Even now I can see myself as I was then. It's like watching an old home movie. I'm young and tan and fit. I've got hair, lots of it. I don't smoke or drink. I'm wearing faded blue jeans and a white polo shirt. I can see myself sitting on Elroy Bredal's dock near dusk one evening. The sky, a bright shimmering pink. And I'm finishing up a letter to my parents that tells what I'm about to do and why I'm doing it and how sorry I am that I never found the courage to talk to them about it. I asked them not to be angry. I tried to explain some of my feelings, but there aren't enough words. And so, I just say that it's a thing that has to be done. At the end of the letter, I talk about the vacations we used to take up in this North Country, at a place called Whitefish Lake, and how the scenery here reminds me of those good times. I tell them I'm fine. I tell them I'll write again from Winnipeg or Montreal or wherever I end up. On my last full day, the 6th day, the old man took me out fishing on the Rainy River. The afternoon was sunny and cold. A stiff breeze came in from the north, and I remember how the little 14-foot boat made sharp, rocking motions as we pushed off from the dock. The current was fast. All around us, there was a vastness to the world, an unpeopled rawness. Just the trees and the sky and the water reaching out toward nowhere. The air had the brittle scent of October. For 10 or 15 minutes, Elroy held a course upstream. The river was choppy and silver gray. Then he turned straight north and put the engine on full throttle. I felt the bow lift beneath me. I remember the wind in my ears, the sound of the old outboard at a lead. For a time, I didn't pay attention to anything, just feeling the cold spray against my face. But then it occurred to me that at some point we must have passed into Canadian waters, across that dotted line between two different worlds. And I remember a sudden tightness in my chest as I looked up and watched the far shore come at me. This wasn't a daydream. It was tangible and real. As we came in toward land, Elroy cut the engine, letting the boat fishtail lightly about 20 yards offshore. The old man didn't look at me or speak. Bending down, he opened up his tackle box and busied himself with a bobber and a piece of wire leader, humming to himself, his eyes down. It struck me then that he must have planned it. I'll never be certain, of course, but I think he meant to bring me up against the realities, to guide me across the river, and to take me to the edge, and to stand a kind of vigil as I choose a life for myself. I remember staring at the old man, then at my hands, then at Canada. The shoreline was dense with brush and timber. I could see tiny red berries in the bushes. I could see a squirrel up in one of those birch trees, a big crow looking at me from a boulder across the river. That close, 20 yards. And I could see the delicate latticework of the leaves, the texture of the soil, the brown needles beneath the pines, the configurations of geology and human history. 20 yards. I could have done it. I could have jumped and started swimming for my life. Inside me, in my chest, I felt a terrible squeezing pressure. Even now as I write this, I can still feel that tightness. And I want you to feel it. The wind coming off the river, the waves, the silence, the wooden frontier. You're at the bow of a boat on the Rainy River. You're 21 years old. You're scared. And there's a hard squeezing pressure in your chest. What would you do? Would you jump? Would you feel pity for yourself? Would you think about your family and your childhood and your dreams and all you're leaving behind? Would it hurt? Would it feel like dying? Would you cry, as I did? I tried to swallow it back. I tried to smile, except I was crying. Now, perhaps, you can understand why I've never told this story before. It's not just the embarrassment of the tears. That's part of it, no doubt. But what embarrasses me much more, and always will, is the paralysis that took my heart. A moral freeze. I couldn't decide, I couldn't act, I couldn't comport myself with even a pretense of modest human dignity. All I could do was cry. Quietly, not bawling, just the chest chokes. At the rear of the boat, Elroy Burdall pretended not to notice. He held a fishing rod in his hands, his head bowed to hide his eyes. He kept humming a soft, monotonous little tone. Everywhere, it seemed, in the trees and water and sky, a great worldwide sadness came pressing down on me, a crushing sorrow like I had never known it before. And what was so sad, I realized, was that Canada had become a pitiful fantasy, silly and hopeless. It was no longer a possibility. Right then, with the shore so close, I understood that I would not do what I should do. I would not swim away from my hometown and my country and my life. I would not be brave. That old image of myself as a hero, as a man of conscience and courage, all that was just a threadbare pipe dream. Bobbing there on the rainy river, looking back at the Minnesota shore, I felt a sudden swell of helplessness come over me, a drowning sensation, as if I had toppled overboard and was being swept away by the silver waves. Chunks of my own history flashed by. I saw a 7-year-old boy in a white cowboy hat and a Lone Ranger mask and a pair of Bolster 6 shooters. I saw a 12-year-old Little League shortstop pivoting to turn a double play. I saw a 16-year-old kid decked out for his first prom, looking spiffy in a white tux and a black bow tie, his hair cut short and flat, his shoes freshly polished. My whole life seemed to slip out into the river, swirling away from me, everything I had ever been or ever wanted to be. I couldn't get my breath. I couldn't stay afloat. I couldn't tell which way to swim. Hallucination, I suppose, but it was as real as anything I would ever feel. I saw my parents calling to me from the far shoreline. I saw my brother and sister, all the townsfolk, the mayor and the entire Chamber of Commerce, and all my old teachers and girlfriends and high school buddies, like some outlandish sporting event. Everybody screaming from the sidelines, rooting me on. A loud stadium roar. Hot dogs and popcorn, stadium smells, stadium heat. A squad of cheerleaders did cartwheels along the banks of the rainy river. They had megaphones and pom-poms and smooth brown thighs. The crowd swayed left and right. A marching band played fight songs. All my aunts and uncles were there, and Abraham Lincoln, and St. George, and a 9-year-old girl named Linda who had died of a brain tumor back in 5th grade, and several members of the United States Senate, and a blind poet scribbling notes, and LBJ, and Huck Finn, and Abby Hoffman, and all the dead soldiers back from the grave, and the many thousands who were later to die, villagers with terrible burns, little kids without arms or legs. Yes, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were there, and a couple of popes, and a first lieutenant named Jimmy Cross, and the last surviving veteran of the American Civil War, Jane Fonda dressed up as Barbella, and an old man sprawled beside a pig pen, and my grandfather, and Gary Cooper, and a kind-faced woman carried an umbrella and a copy of Plato's Republic, and a million ferocious citizens waving flags of all shapes and colors. People in hard hats, people in headbands. They were all whooping and chanting and urging me toward one shore or the other. I saw faces from my distant past and distant future. My wife was there. My unborn daughter waved at me, and my 2 sons hopped up and down, and a drill sergeant named Blyton steered and shot up a finger and shook his head. There was a choir in bright purple robes. There was a cabbie from the Bronx. There was a slim young man I would one day kill with a hand grenade along a red clay trail outside the village of Mikey. The little aluminum boat rocked softly beneath me. There was the wind and the sky. I tried to will myself overboard. I gripped the edge of the boat and leaned forward and thought, now. I did try. It just wasn't possible. All those eyes on me, the town, the whole universe, and I couldn't risk the embarrassment. It was as if there was an audience to my life. That swirl of faces along the river, and in my head, I could hear people screaming at me, "Traitor!" They yelled, "Turncoat!" I felt myself blush. I couldn't tolerate it. I couldn't endure the mockery, or the disgrace, or the patriotic ridicule. Even in my imagination, the shore, just 20 yards off, I couldn't make myself be brave. It had nothing to do with morality. Embarrassment, that's all it was. And right then, I submitted. I would go to war. I would kill and maybe die, because I was embarrassed not to. That was the sad thing. And so I sat in the bow of the boat and cried. It was loud now, loud, hard crying. Elroy Burdall remained quiet. He kept fishing. He worked his line with the tips of his fingers, patiently, squinting out at his red and white bobber on the rainy river. His eyes were flat and impassive. He didn't speak. He was simply there, like the river and the late summer sun. And yet, by his presence, his muteful watchfulness, he made it real. He was the true audience. He was a witness like God, or like the gods who look on in absolute silence as we live our lives, as we make our choices or fail to make them. "Ain't bitin'," he said. Then, after a time, the old man pulled in his line and turned the boat back toward Minnesota. I don't remember saying goodbye. That last night, we had dinner together, and I went to bed early, and in the morning, Elroy fixed me breakfast. When I told him I'd be leaving, the old man nodded as if he already knew. He looked down at the table and smiled. At some point later in the morning, it's possible that we shook hands. I just don't remember. But I do know that by the time I'd finished packing, the old man had disappeared. Around noon, when I took my suitcases out to the car, I noticed that his old black pickup truck was no longer parked in front of the main lodge. I went inside and waited for a while, but I felt a bone's certainty that he wouldn't be back. In a way, I thought, it was appropriate. I washed up the breakfast dishes, left his $200 on the kitchen counter, got into the car, and drove south toward home. The day was cloudy. I passed through towns with familiar names, through the pine forests and down the prairie, and then to Vietnam, where I was a soldier, and then home again. I survived, but it's not a happy ending. I was a coward. I went to the war.